Decoded.
Welcome back to Book Decoded. We're diving into a really interesting topic today. We're going to explore the history of this idea that we should all be entrepreneurs. Our guide for this trip through time is Make Your Own Job: How to Survive and Thrive in the Gig Economy. It might seem like entrepreneurship and the gig economy are like, modern things. But this book shows us that this whole mindset goes way further back than you might think.
It's pretty wild to see how this idea has changed and evolved over time. We usually think of entrepreneurship as something like, Silicon Valley and startups. But this book, Make Your Own Job, takes us all the way back to the late 1800s, back to the surprising beginnings of this whole idea.
Okay, so let's go back in time, back to the late 1800s. What was going on back then that might have led to this entrepreneurial way of thinking?
Well, imagine a world that's totally transforming. Industrialization is booming. Those traditional jobs are disappearing left and right. And people are grappling with this huge sense of uncertainty about the future. It was a time of major upheaval, social and economic, kind of like what we're seeing in some ways today, actually.
So people back then were feeling that same pressure to adapt and find new ways to make a living.
Totally. And in the middle of all this anxiety, a movement pops up. It's called New Thought. And it basically offered a spiritual solution to all these economic worries. New Thought folks believed that if you had the right mindset, you could create your own opportunities no matter what was happening around you. It was all about taking control and manifesting your own success.
It sounds a little bit like the power of positive thinking thing. We hear that a lot these days.
Yeah, definitely some similarities there. One of the big names in this movement was Orison Swett Marden. He wrote a best-selling book called Pushing to the Front. Marden was all about self-reliance, perseverance, and the idea that you should turn your passions into a career.
So even back then, people were saying, don't settle for a boring 9-to-5.
Yes.
Find something you love and go for it.
Exactly. This whole focus on individuality and self-determination, it became this really powerful force. And it ended up shaping the future of work in some pretty unexpected ways. As we get into the early 20th century, we see these ideas starting to pop up in the world of management.
Okay, now this is where it gets interesting. Because the early 1900s make me think of, assembly lines and scientific management.
Yeah.
Which doesn't exactly sound like entrepreneurship to me.
Right. That's when we see the rise of scientific management, or what we call Taylorism. It was all about efficiency and standardization. But what's really interesting is that even in this structured work environment, thinkers like Hugo Münsterberg and Werner Sombart, these guys recognized the importance of what they called entrepreneurial energy.
So how do they put those two things together? Those ideas seem pretty opposite.
Well, they said that this entrepreneurial spirit, this drive to create new things, it wasn't just about starting your own business. It was a valuable quality, something you could cultivate and use in any organization. They thought that managers especially, they needed to have this creative energy so they could be good leaders and inspire their teams.
So they weren't looking for managers who just followed orders. They needed leaders who could think differently, motivate people, and maybe even challenge how things were done.
Exactly. And one of the big players in spreading these ideas was Harvard Business School. They started using case studies and focusing on business history to teach a whole new generation of leaders about entrepreneurial management.
So these ideas were starting to go mainstream.
Exactly. And this shift kept going through some pretty big events, like the Great Depression, for example. It might seem counterintuitive, but the economic turmoil of the 1930s actually boosted the entrepreneurial spirit in a lot of ways.
Really? I would have thought that people would want the security of, traditional jobs during a time like that.
Yeah, I get that. But when there aren't enough jobs and the traditional paths are blocked, people are forced to get creative. They have to find new ways to make a living.
It's like necessity is the mother of invention.
Exactly. And that's when we see companies like Avon take off. Avon's business model, it really thrived during the Depression because it gave people, especially women, the chance to be their own bosses and earn money independently, even when it was really hard to find a traditional job.
That's really interesting. It shows that even when things are tough, that entrepreneurial drive finds a way.
Absolutely. And this spirit was pushed even further by people like Dale Carnegie. He had a more accessible and practical approach to self-improvement and career success. Now, his work wasn't specifically about entrepreneurship, but Carnegie's ideas, especially his famous book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, They really resonated with people who are trying to figure out the workplace
Yeah.
and find more fulfillment in their careers.
So it's like he was giving people the tools to succeed, whether they were running their own business or working for a big company.
Exactly. Carnegie talked about the importance of relationships, good communication, and finding ways to make your work enjoyable and, meaningful. These are good skills for everyone, not just entrepreneurs.
This is amazing. It's like we're putting together a puzzle here. We've gone from the anxieties of industrialization to the self-reliance of new thought, the rise of entrepreneurial management, and then the depression pushing even more people towards this go-getter mindset. Wow, what happens next in this evolution of the entrepreneurial spirit?
So as we move into, the post-war world, this entrepreneurial energy, it kind of takes on a whole new meaning. During that post-war boom, entrepreneurship got tied to this idea of American democracy and global leadership, especially in the tech sector, which was really taking off.
Oh, wow. So being an entrepreneur became patriotic, like a symbol of American ingenuity and progress.
Yeah, you could say that. Think about Route 128 in Massachusetts. People called it America's technology highway. And then you had companies like Polaroid, really pushing the boundaries of innovation. These entrepreneurs, they weren't just building businesses, they were contributing to America's place in the world, They embodied that spirit of progress and possibility that really defined the post-war era.
But like with any big idea, there's always another side of the story, right? Did Make Your Own Job talk about any downsides to this whole emphasis on entrepreneurship?
It did. The book doesn't shy away from the complexities. As this push for innovation and competition got stronger, we start to see some potential problems, things like inequality, job insecurity, and this constant pressure to hustle just to stay afloat. It's that double-edged sword. Entrepreneurship gives you freedom and opportunity, but it can also create a lot of pressure and uncertainty.
Yeah, it's like they say, it's lonely at the top. Maybe all that hustling comes with a price.
Right. And the story keeps evolving. As we move into the later part of the 20th century, there's this interesting shift geographically. We see the rise of the Sun Belt and a whole new wave of entrepreneurial thinking. This time, it's focused on revitalizing the American South.
It's cool how entrepreneurship seems to adapt, to different times and places. So it's not just a big city thing.
Exactly. People like Sam Walton, the guy who started Walmart, he saw entrepreneurship as the key to the South's economic growth and cultural identity. He believed in empowering employees at all levels to think like entrepreneurs, to take ownership and, share in the company's success. It's that whole employee as associate idea that a lot of companies have adopted.
It sounds empowering, but I can also see how it could be, how the line between empowerment and exploitation could get blurry.
You're right. That's an important point. And Make Your Own Job really digs into that tension. Alongside this corporate entrepreneurship, we also see the rise of social entrepreneurship. This is where people started using business principles to tackle societal problems, especially issues like poverty and racial inequality.
So things like microfinance initiatives, community development projects, businesses with a social mission.
Exactly. There was this push to find entrepreneurial solutions to some of society's toughest problems. And this brings us to the 1980s and 90s, a time of major economic restructuring, which really set the stage for the gig economy we have today.
Right. That's when we see all these layoffs, outsourcing, and a move towards more flexible work arrangements like contracts. People had to create their own opportunities out of necessity.
Exactly. This restructuring pushed even more people toward an entrepreneurial mindset. It wasn't just a choice anymore. It was a way to survive. And this is where someone like Richard Florida comes in. He's the guy who coined the term creative class.
Oh, yeah. Florida's work was all about the rise of knowledge workers and the importance of cities as centers for innovation and creativity. It's like the birth of the modern entrepreneur.
That's a great way to put it. But Make Your Own Job reminds us that even as this new economy emerged, it brought its own set of challenges. The pressure to constantly innovate, the lack of job security, and the growing gap between the rich and the poor. All of these issues became more intense.
So again, we see this tension between the potential of entrepreneurship and the real challenges it can create.
Exactly. And still, this entrepreneurial ideal, it hangs on. It's amazing how adaptable it is. For example, in the late 20th century, we see the rise of positive psychology, with people like Martin Seligman and Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi exploring how entrepreneurship can lead to happiness and fulfillment.
So now it's about more than just financial success. It's about a good life.
It's about finding meaning and purpose in your work, aligning your passions with what you do, going after goals that matter to you, and experiencing what Csikszentmihalyi called flow in your day-to-day
I
activities.
see. It's about feeling engaged and energized by your work, whether you're running a company or part of a team.
Exactly. And we can't forget about the girl boss phenomenon. That popped up in the 2010s. This idea really resonated with women, especially millennial women. They wanted more agency and empowerment in the workplace and beyond.
Right, it was all about building your own empire, being your own CEO, but I feel like there's been some pushback against that girl boss image lately.
Yeah, you're right. The girl boss ideal, while empowering in some ways, it also came with its own pressures and potential problems.
Mhm.
It often glorified overwork,
Right.
perpetuated this hustle culture that wasn't sustainable for a lot of people. And sometimes it masked deeper issues of inequality, especially for women of color.
It shows how important it is to, like,
Yeah.
really look at these trends and understand the nuances. There are always different sides to the story.
Absolutely. And make your own job encourages us to do that. The book reminds us that the entrepreneur ideal, in all its different forms, it's constantly changing. It's shaped by social, economic, and technological forces, and it's always open to critique and reinterpretation.
Wow, we've covered a lot of ground, haven't we? From the anxieties of industrialization all the way to the rise of the gig economy. This entrepreneurial spirit, it really seems like a constant theme throughout American history.
It really is. And it's striking how deep this idea of the entrepreneurial work ethic goes, this whole notion that we should all be striving for autonomy, innovation, self-reliance in our work. It has such deep roots in American culture, and it's still shaping how we think about work today.
Yeah, it's not just about starting a business anymore, is it? It's like
Yeah.
a broader cultural mindset about taking ownership, being adaptable, always looking for ways to create value.
You got it. It's about that proactive go-getter attitude. Whether you're working for a big company or blazing your own trail, make your own job really hammers that point home.
So after this fascinating journey through history, what's the big takeaway for our listeners today? What can we learn from this entrepreneurial legacy, especially as we try to navigate this, ever-changing world of work?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the book, it doesn't give us easy answers. It leaves us with this really thought-provoking question. Does this entrepreneurial work ethic actually empower us? Or does it make us more vulnerable in a world that's constantly changing and, super competitive?
It's a good question. It's inspiring to think about the potential, the ability to create your own opportunities. But it can also feel like a lot of pressure to always be on, always hustling, always striving for that next big thing.
And the book makes it clear that this tension between empowerment and vulnerability, it's been there all along. It's a story of progress and struggle, of individual triumphs and systemic challenges.
Out of all the examples we've talked about,
Yeah.
what do you think are the most valuable parts of this entrepreneurial mindset? The things that are most relevant for, the future of work?
I think adaptability, resilience, and a willingness to embrace change are key. The world of work is constantly shifting, and those who can adapt quickly, find creative solutions, they'll have a real advantage. We've seen this throughout history, from the rise of factories to the digital age we're in now.
That makes a lot of sense. It's not about knowing everything. It's about being open to learning, experimenting, and changing direction when you need to.
Exactly. And it's also about feeling like you have control over your career. Even in a traditional job, you can be entrepreneurial. You can take initiative, solve problems, create value. It's about having that mindset no matter what your job title is.
Well, make your own job has definitely given us a lot to think about. I think anyone who's interested in the history of work, the gig economy, or just, the bigger cultural forces that shape our lives, they would find this book really insightful.
I totally agree. This book makes us think critically about this whole entrepreneurial ideal, to see both the good and the bad. And in the end, it encourages us to find our own way in the world of work, a way that fits our values, passions, and goals.
Well said. And on that note, we're wrapping up another episode of Book Decoded. If you want to dive deeper into this fascinating history, make sure to check out Make Your Own Job: How to Survive and Thrive in the Gig Economy. Until next time, happy reading.